of the affair, returned to London, and settled himself in his chambers in Chancery Lane. His duties, however, as clerk of the court, would necessarily call him to Lancaster in August, when the assizes commenced, and when he would assist in the trials of such of the witches as were still in durance. From Mother Demdike it was natural that the conversation should turn to her weird retreat, Malkin Tower, and Richard Sherborne expressed his surprise that the unhallowed structure should be suffered to remain standing after her removal. Nicholas said he was equally anxious with his brother-in-law for its demolition, but it was not so easy to be accomplished as it might appear, for the deserted structure was in such ill repute with the common folk, as well as every one else, that no one dared approach it, even in the daytime. A boggart, it was said, had taken possession of its vaults, and scared away all who ventured near it, sometimes showing himself in one frightful shape, and sometimes in another, now as a monstrous goat, now as an equally monstrous cat, uttering fearful cries, glaring with fiery eyes from out the windows, or appearing in all his terror on the summit of the tower. Moreover, the haunted structure was frequently lighted up at dead of night. Strains of unearthly music were heard resounding from it, and wild figures were seen flitting past the windows, as if engaged in dancing and revelry, so that it appeared that no alteration for the better had taken place there, and that things were still quite as improperly conducted now as they had been in the time of Mother Demdike, or in those of her predecessors, Isole de Heton and Blackburn the robber. The common opinion was that Satan, with all his imps, had taken up their abode in the tower, and as they liked their quarters, led a jolly life there, dancing and drinking all night long, it would be useless at present to give them notice to quit, still less to attempt to pull down the house about their ears. Richard Sherborne heard this wondrous relation in silence, but with a look of incredulity, and when it was done, he winked slyly at his brother-in-law. A strange expression, half comical, half suspicious, might also have been observed on Fogg's countenance, and he narrowly watched the squire as the latter spoke. But with the disappearance of the malignant old hags who had so long infested the neighbourhood, had all the mischief and calamity ceased? Or were the people as much affected as heretofore? Were there, in short, so many cases of witchcraft, real or supposed? This was the question next addressed by Sherborne to Nicholas. The squire answered decidedly that there was not. Since the burning of the two old beldames, and the imprisonment of the others, the whole district of Pendle had improved. All those who had been smitten with strange illnesses had recovered, and the inhabitants of the little village of Sabden, who had experienced the fullest effects of their malignity, were entirely free from sickness. And not only had they and their families suddenly regained health and strength, but all belonging to them had undergone a similar beneficial change. The kine that had lost their milk now yielded it abundantly. The lame horse halted no longer. The murrain ceased among the sheep. The pigs that had grown lean amidst abundance fattened rapidly. And though the farrows that had perished during the evil ascendancy of the witches could not be brought back again, their place promised speedily to be supplied by others. The corn blighted earlier in the year had sprung forth anew, and the trees, nipped in the bud, were laden with fruit. In short, all was as fair and as flourishing as it had recently been the reverse. Among others, John Law, the pedlar, who had been deprived of the use of his limbs by the damnable arts of Mother Demdike, had marvellously recovered on the very night of her destruction, and was now as strong and as active as ever. "Such happy results having followed the removal of the witches, it is to be hoped," Sherborne said, "that the riddance would be complete, and that none of the obnoxious brood would be left to inflict future miseries upon their fellows." This could not be the case so long as James Device was allowed to go at large, nor while his mother, Elizabeth Device, a notorious witch, was suffered to escape with impunity. There was also Jennet, Elizabeth's daughter, a mischievous and ill-favoured little creature, who inherited all the ill qualities of her parents. These were spawn of the old snake, and until they were entirely exterminated, there could be no security against a recurrence of the evil. Again, there was Nance Redferne, old Chattox's granddaughter, a comely woman enough, but a reputed witch and an undoubted fabricator of clay images. She was still at liberty, though she ought to be with the rest in the dungeons of Lancaster Castle. It was useless to allege that with the destruction of the old hags all danger had ceased. Common prudence would keep the others quiet now, but the moment the storm had passed over they would resume their atrocious practices, and all would be as bad as ever. No, no, the tree must be utterly uprooted, or it would inevitably burst forth anew. With these opinions Nicholas generally concurred, but he expressed some sympathy for Nance Redferne, whom he thought far too good looking to be as wicked and malicious as represented. But however that might be, and however much he might desire to get rid of the family of the Devices, he feared such a step might be attended with danger to Alizon, and that she might in some way be implicated with them. This last remark he addressed in an undertone to his brother-in-law. Sherborne did not at first feel any apprehension on that score, but on reflection he admitted that Nicholas was perhaps right. And though Alizon was now the recognised daughter of Mistress Nutter, yet her long and intimate connection with the Device family might operate to her prejudice, while her near relationship to an avowed witch would not tend to remove the unfavourable impression. Sherborne then went on to speak in the most rapturous forms of the beauty and goodness of the young girl who formed the subject of their conversation, and declared he was not in the least surprised that Richard Assheton was so much in love with her. And yet, he added, a most extraordinary change had taken place in her since the dreadful night on Pendle Hill, when her mother's guilt had been proclaimed, and when her arrest had taken place as an offender of the darkest dye. Alizon, he said, had lost none of her beauty, but her light and joyous expression of countenance had been supplanted by a look of profound sadness, which nothing could remove. Gentle and meek in her deportment, she seemed to look upon herself as under a ban, and as if she were unfit to associate with the rest of the world. In vain Richard Assheton and his sister endeavoured to remove this impression by the tenderest assiduities. In vain they sought to induce her to enter into amusements consistent with her years. She declined all society but their own, and passed the greater part of her time in prayer. Sherborne had seen her so engaged, and the expression of her countenance, he declared, was seraphic. On the extreme verge of a high bank situated at the point of junction between Swansea Beck and the Ribble stood an old decayed oak. Little of the once mighty tree beyond the gnarled trunk was left, and this was completely hollow, while there was a great rift near the bottom, through which a man might easily creep, and when once in, stand erect without inconvenience. Beneath the bank the river was deep and still, forming a pool where the largest and fattest fish were to be met with. In addition to this, the spot was extremely secluded, being rarely visited by the angler on account of the thick copse by which it was surrounded, and which extended along the back, from the point of view of confluence between the lesser and the larger stream, to Downham Mill, nearly half a mile distant. The sides of the Ribble were here, as elsewhere, beautifully wooded, and as the clear stream winded along through banks of every diversity of shape and character, and covered by forest trees of every description, and of the most luxuriant growth, the effect was enchanting; the more so that the sun, having now risen high in the heavens, poured down a flood of summer heat and radiance that rendered these cool shades inexpressibly delightful. Pleasant was it, as the huntsmen leapt from stone to stone, to listen to the sound of the waters rushing past them; pleasant, as they sprang upon some green holm or fairy islet standing in the midst of the stream, and dividing its lucid waters, to suffer the eye to follow the course of the rapid current, and to see it here sparkling in the bright sunshine, there plunged in shade by the overhanging trees, now fringed with osiers and rushes, now embanked by the smoothest sward of emerald green, anon defended by steep rocks, sometimes bold and bare, but more frequently clothed with timber, and then sinking down by one of those sudden but exquisite transitions which nature alone dares display from this savage and sombre character into the softest and gentlest expression, everywhere varied, yet everywhere beautiful. through such scenes of sylvan